Zimbabwe, officially the Republic of Zimbabwe, is a country located in southern Africa, between the Zambezi and Limpopo rivers. Bordered by South Africa, Botswana, Zambia and Mozambique, the capital and largest city is Harare. A country of roughly 16 million people, Zimbabwe has 16 official languages, with English, Shona and Ndebele the most commonly used. A landlocked country in southern Africa, Zimbabwe is known for its dramatic landscape and diverse wildlife, much of it within parks, reserves and safari areas. On the Zambezi River, Victoria Falls make a thundering 108-meter drop into a narrow Batoka Gorge. Formed where the Zambezi River plunges over great cliffs, the Victoria Falls is a UNESCO World Heritage Site and lies at the head of the basalt-lined Zambezi Gorges. Victoria Falls provides an excellent start point and the gateway for an African safari, within easy reach of Botswana, Namibia, and the game areas of both Zambia and Zimbabwe. Since the 11th century, present-day Zimbabwe has been the site of several organized states and kingdoms, as well as a major route for migration and trade. The British South Africa Company of Cecil Rhodes first demarcated the present territory during the 1890s. It became the self-governing British colony of Southern Rhodesia in 1923. In 1965, the conservative white minority government unilaterally declared independence of Rhodesia. The state endured international isolation and a 15-year guerrilla war with black nationalist forces that was called the Zimbabwe War of Liberation, that took place from July 1964 to December 1979. On 3rd of March 1978, the black nationalist leaders, Muzorewa, Sithole, and other non-exiled leaders signed an agreement at Government House, Salisbury, which paved the way for the interim government. In the accord, the leadership of the new government was an executive council made up of Muzorewa, Sithole, and Jeremiah Chirau, along with Ian Smith. The country was renamed Zimbabwe Rhodesia under a black majority government. However, this new order failed to win international recognition, and the war continued.
After a very full discussion, the Rhodesian Front Caucus unanimously lent its support to what has been agreed at Lancaster House and will facilitate its passage through Parliament. The caucus underlined the need for the conference to be concluded as soon as possible, with the consequent removal of sanctions and the end of the war, and adds its weight to the government delegation's endeavour to achieve those objects.
It was in 1979 that a real deal was conducted that ended the 15-year guerrilla war. The Lancaster House Agreement, signed on 21st of December 1979, allowed for the creation and recognition of the Republic of Zimbabwe, replacing the unrecognized state of Rhodesia. In April 1980, the country achieved internationally recognized independence as Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe then joined the Commonwealth of Nations, which it withdrew from in December 2003. It became a member of the United Nations, the Southern African Development Community, SADC, the African Union, AU, and the Common Market for Eastern and Southern Africa, COMESA. It was once known as the Jewel of Africa for its prosperity. Robert Mugabe was the sole ruler of Zimbabwe since its establishment as an independent state. Mugabe became Prime Minister of the new Republic of Zimbabwe on 18th of April 1980.
Truly serve Zimbabwe in the office of President, so help me God.
On December 31st, 1987, Mugabe was sworn in as Zimbabwe's first executive president in a 5-hour ceremony at Harare's National Stadium, a post he held until the army deposed him on 15th of November 2017. Robert Mugabe was born on February 21st, 1924, in Kutama, the then Southern Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe. In 1963, he founded ZANU, a resistance movement against British colonial rule. In 1980, when Zimbabwe obtained its independence, Mugabe became Prime Minister of the new Republic of Zimbabwe.
Bush nor Blair can bring about regime change here.
Being a sole leader of both the ruling party ZANU and of the country, Mugabe was at the center of either the success or failure of Zimbabwe from its inception as a modern state for more than 3 decades.
Huge leaders inside the country.
Robert Mugabe is one of the longest-serving African rulers. Trained as a teacher, he spent 11 years as a political prisoner under Ian Smith's Rhodesian government. Mugabe studied in South Africa, and in 1960 he returned to his hometown on leave, planning to introduce his fiancée to his mother. Unexpectedly, upon his arrival, Mugabe encountered a drastically changed southern Rhodesia. Tens of thousands of black families had been displaced by the new colonial government, and the white population had exploded. The brutal government denied black majority rule, resulting in violent protests. Mugabe too was outraged by this denial of blacks' rights. In July 1960, he agreed to address the crowd at the protest march of 7,000 staged at Salisbury's Harare Town Hall. He rose to lead the Zimbabwe African National Union movement and was one of the key negotiators in the 1979 Lancaster House Agreement, which led to the creation of a fully democratic Zimbabwe. Elected Prime Minister and later President, he embraced conciliation with the country's white minority, but sidelined his rivals through politics and force. In 1989, Mugabe set out to implement a 5-year plan, which slackened price restrictions for farmers, allowing them to designate their own prices. By 1994, at the end of the 5-year period, the economy had seen some growth in the farming, mining and manufacturing industries. Mugabe additionally managed to build clinics and schools for the black population. Also over the course of that time, Mugabe's wife, Sarah, passed away, freeing him to marry Grace Marufu. In 2000, Mugabe organized a referendum on a new Zimbabwean constitution and allowed the government to seize white-owned land. Groups opposed to the constitution formed the Movement for Democratic Change, MDC, which successfully campaigned for a no vote in the referendum. That same year, groups of individuals calling themselves war veterans began invading white-owned farms. Violence caused many of Zimbabwe's whites to flee the country. Opposing the transfer of land from the white commercial farmers to the black small-scale farmers, the West imposed sanctions on Zimbabwe that triggered years of hyperinflation and food shortages that created a nation of impoverished billionaires. In 2009, Zimbabwe stopped printing its currency, with currencies from other countries being used. In mid-2015, Zimbabwe announced plans to have completely switched to the United States dollar by the end of 2015. After a disputed election in 2009, Mugabe reluctantly agreed to share some power with the rival Movement for Democratic Change. On December 10, 2011, at the National People's Conference in Bulawayo, Mugabe officially announced his bid for the 2012 Zimbabwe presidential election. The election was postponed. However, both the government and opposition agreed to draft a new constitution and rescheduled for 2013. The people of Zimbabwe came out in support of the new document in March 2013, approving it in a constitutional referendum. Though many believed that the 2013 presidential election would be marred by corruption and violence. In late July 2013, amidst discussion regarding a highly anticipated Zimbabwean election, an 89-year-old Mugabe made headlines when he was asked whether he planned to run again in the 2018 election. Robert Mugabe was a paradox as a leader, but he was the genesis of the multiple crises that affected Zimbabwe, and in particular in terms of factionism within the ruling ZANU-PF. But at the same time, he was also the glue that kept ZANU-PF together. And there had been a great fear for a long time that once he left the political scene, ZANU would struggle to keep it together. Indeed, many analysts and commentators in the past warned that the divisions within the party were so deep that the party would eventually start turning in on itself. While in power, Mugabe had no obvious anointed successor, making it unclear what direction the country would take after its only post-independence leader dies or finally loses an election. It is this uncertainty that caused his eventual departure. His wife Grace Mugabe played a significant role in triggering this process. Grace Mugabe accused senior figures in his ruling ZANU-PF of dividing the party by maneuvering to replace the Zimbabwean leader and called on them to let him finish his job. She particularly attacked Joyce Mujuru, Mugabe's deputy from 2004 to 2014, and a frontrunner to succeed the party leadership. The First Lady accused Mujuru of plotting to oust Mugabe at a party congress. One ZANU-PF Politburo member once said that Mugabe, who always kept rivals guessing about his next move, could step down once he secured a final 5-year term in 2018, by which time he would be 94, to make way for his wife. But before he let his preference successor to replace him, the army removed Mugabe. On the 15th of November 2017, Zimbabwean soldiers took over the headquarters of the state broadcaster, ZBC, and blocked access to government offices.
Comrade R.G. Mugabe and his family are safe and sound, and their security is guaranteed. We are only targeting criminals around him who are committing crimes that are causing social and economic suffering in the country in order to bring them to justice.
But the army denied that a military coup was going on. After taking over the national TV station, an army spokesman said President Robert Mugabe was safe.
Well, if it fluffs like a duck, dwaddles like a duck, then it's a duck. This is a coup. There's no question about that. So we condemn the extra legal extraction of power from an elected civilian authority.
The crisis that culminated with Mugabe's departure started on November 8th, with President Mugabe's sacking of Vice President Emmerson Mnangagwa amid a row over the 93-year-old's president's successor. Then expelled Mr. Mnangagwa from the party. Mugabe called his former deputy a conspirator and warned that he was planning to purge others from the party. First Lady Grace Mugabe was said to be eyeing the vice presidency after President Mugabe sacked Emmerson Mnangagwa and ultimately replaced her husband as leader of the country. Emmerson Mnangagwa rejected his dismissal and vowed to return home to fight for democracy, as he revealed he had fled the country after being sacked and labelled a traitor. Then the army announced that it sided with the deposed vice president. Zimbabwe military chief general Constantino Chiwenga said that the army was prepared to act to end purges within Mr. Mugabe's ZANU-PF party.
We must remind those behind the current treacherous shenanigans that when it comes to matters of protecting our revolution, the military will not hesitate to step in.
Good morning, Zimbabwe.
After the army controlled the country, pressure was applied to Mugabe to resign. On November 16th, Mugabe refused to step down during talks with the generals. Opposition leader Morgan Tsvangirai also called for Mugabe to go in the interest of the people. Mugabe and envoys from the Southern African Development Community, SADC, regional bloc, dispatched by Zuma, held talks at the presidency. On November 17th, Mugabe made a first public appearance since the military takeover, attending a university graduation ceremony. Veterans of Zimbabwe's independence war called for mass anti-Mugabe street protests. Their leader, Christopher Mutsvangwa, told Mugabe the game is up. 8 of the 10 regional branches of the ruling ZANU-PF party also called for him to resign. On November 18th, thousands of protesters flooded Zimbabwe's streets demanding Mugabe's resignation. On November 19th, the influential youth league leader of ZANU-PF called for Mugabe and his wife Grace to go. On November 20th, ZANU-PF set plans for launching the impeachment process in Parliament after Mugabe missed the noon deadline to quit. The party also reached out to the main opposition, the Movement for Democratic Change, MDC, seeking their cooperation to pass the necessary parliamentary votes. Mnangagwa also issued a statement in which he called for Mugabe to stand down.
In a few weeks.
On November 21st, 2017, President Robert Mugabe announced his resignation. On November 22nd, Mnangagwa returned to Zimbabwe to replace Mugabe that ended the 37-year-long reign of Mugabe. On Friday, November 24th, 2017, Emmerson Mnangagwa was sworn in as interim president of Zimbabwe, replacing the single ruler of the nation since its inception as a modern independent state of Africa. Zimbabwe's new leader, Emmerson Mnangagwa, has hailed a new and unfolding democracy after returning from exile to replace Robert Mugabe. He also vowed to create jobs in the country. He told a cheering crowd in Harare, "We want to grow our economy. We want peace. We want jobs, jobs, jobs." Mr. MNANGAGWA fled to South Africa 2 weeks before his triumphant comeback as the new president. His dismissal led the military to intervene and force an end to Mr. Mugabe's 37-year-long rule. Elected first as the new leader of Zimbabwe's ruling party, and positioned to take over as the country's leader, MNANGAGWA engineered a remarkable comeback using skills he no doubt learned from his longtime mentor, President Robert Mugabe. Emerson Dambudzo MNANGAGWA was born on 15th of September 1942 in Shinabi, southern Rhodesia. He is a member of the Karanga ethnic group, the largest subgroup of Zimbabwe's major Shona ethnic group. His parents were politically active farmers, and he had to flee to Zambia with his family because of his father's resistance against white settlers. At Zimbabwe's independence in 1980, MNANGAGWA became the first Minister of National Security. That same year, MNANGAGWA took over as chairman of the Joint High Command. While MNANGAGWA was Security Minister, he was Zimbabwe's spy master and in charge of the Central Intelligence Organization. During his tenure, the Zimbabwean 5th Brigade massacred thousands of civilians, mainly ethnic Ndebele's, in Matabeleland during the Gukahurindi civil conflict. MNANGAGWA denied that he had any role in this and blamed the army for the deaths. However, his intelligence agency worked with the army to suppress Joshua Nkomo's Zimbabwe African People's Union during the conflict. Despite the Unity Accord, which ended the conflict, merged Mugabe's Zimbabwe African National Union and Nkomo's ZAPU to form ZANU-PF, MNANGAGWA is still disliked in Matabeleland. From 1988 to 2000, MNANGAGWA was Minister of Justice, Legal and Paramilitary Affairs, and Leader of the House. He was appointed Acting Minister of Finance for 15 months from 1995 to 1996, and was also Acting Minister of Foreign Affairs for a short period. His tenure as Minister of Justice, Legal and Parliamentary Affairs saw him setting up the Judicial College and the Small Claims Court to address the critical shortage of magistrates, prosecutors and other judicial officers in the country. He also introduced several amendments to various acts in the Constitution. MNANGAGWA was defeated in the 2000 parliamentary elections by Blessing Chibundo of the Movement for Democratic Change in Kwekwe constituency, but Mugabe appointed him to one of the unelected seats in Parliament. Following the election, he was elected as Speaker of Parliament on 18th of July 2000. It was during his time as Speaker of Parliament that the UN investigation into illegal exploitation of natural resources from the Congo recommended a travel ban and financial restrictions upon him for his alleged involvement in making Harare a significant illicit diamond trading centre. In the March 2005 parliamentary election, he was again defeated by Chibundo in Kwekwe, and Mugabe again appointed him to an unelected seat. His campaign manager blamed this defeat on the Majuru faction, saying that it had manipulated the situation so that the MDC could win the seat and thereby undermine MNANGAGWA. After an alleged fallout with the president, he was made Minister of Rural Housing from 2005 to 2009, which was largely seen as a demotion. MNANGAGWA served for decades as Mugabe's enforcer, a role that gave him a reputation for being astute, ruthless, and effective at manipulating the levers of power. Among the people, he is more feared than popular, but he has strategically fostered a loyal support base within the military and security forces. A leading government figure since Zimbabwe's independence in 1980, he became Vice President in 2014 and is widely known as the Crocodile, and his supporters are called Team Lacoste for the brand's crocodile logo. The 75-year-old is smart and skillful, but will he be a panacea for Zimbabwe's problems? Will he bring good governance and economic management?
Expectations from the office now I occupy